The Wrestling Roundtable, that's what you call yourself, Eric? That stupid fool that I don't even realize where he's from.
An intro like only Prince Nana can do. I'm the one he's talking about. I'm the host, Eric Santamaria, and you are listening to Wrestling Roundtable Radio Live on blogtalkradio.com/Wrestling Roundtable. Of course, the number to call is 347-857-4647. And you can listen to us every other Tuesday here on Blog Talk Radio, right after NXT at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or probably like 4 or 5 in the morning in the UK, whatever it is. At least as long as NXT lasts. Don't know how much longer that's going to last, but that's the way it is for the time being. And on the panel today, welcoming Jason Aletto. Hello, Jay.
Hello, Eric. How you doing tonight, brother?
Doing all right. Can't wait to talk about all the stuff we're going to be talking about today, mixed martial arts and pro wrestling, but also want to bring on Rodney LeConte, director of the Grappling Kings, who will be competing this weekend in Wildwood at the North American Grappling Association tournament. That's NAGA for short. Hey, yo, Rod.
What up, Eric? I'm ready to whoop some ass this weekend.
So what division are you going to be competing in?
I'm going to be competing in the beginner cruiserweight, which is the 199 weight class. I mean, I feel great. I weighed in after training today at 194, which is probably the lightest I've been since like college. I'm in great shape. My cardio's great, and I'm ready to roll on Saturday.
Oh, good for you.
So, your brother Martin's going to be competing too. Are you going to be competing in no-gi or gi?
I'm doing no-gi. Martin's doing both, actually.
Also want to bring on Will Brooks, following in the footsteps of Jason Aletto as yet another fan to join the panel. Hello, Will.
How's it going, guys?
It's going all right. Good to hear from you. But, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to start off with mixed martial arts. UFC On Versus 2 happened this past Sunday, coming out of San Diego, and unfortunately the ratings were down a little from the first Versus show. About 1 million people, more or less, watched this one as opposed to the first one, which was about 1.5 million. And it's a real shame because I thought this was a really kick-ass show. Once again, headlined by John Jones, but we will get to the main event in a little bit. Starting off with the opening bout in the lightweight division, Takanori Gomi, former Pride lightweight champion. Amazing knockout with a right hook on Tyson Griffin. Were you as surprised as I was, Rodney? Did you expect Tyson Griffin to go down so quick?
I didn't think Tyson Griffin would go down at all. I thought maybe he could pull off the win, but once I saw him go down, I mean, never in the UFC has anyone finished off Tyson Griffin like that, and just to see him do a face plant was just, it was pretty shocking, and I don't think anyone expected, but good for Gomi. He said he has to get used to the American style, and if he keeps up the pace.
Yeah, Joe Rogan was alluding to the fact that Gomi has these wild swing for the fences type punches, and that's exactly what he pulled out on Tyson Griffin. I was shocked to see the fight end so quickly. I thought it'd go to at least the second or third round, and I was surprised to see Gomi win, actually. I was really shocked. I thought Tyson Griffin would actually handle him, but it was great to see Gomi fight kind of like he did in Pride, watching those old Best of Pride shows in Spike. It was good seeing a flash from the past.
Especially in the lightweight division as it is now, because, of course, coming up at the end of the month in Boston is the rematch with B.J. Penn and Frankie Edgar, and I guess we're going to find out if B.J. Penn just had an off night in Abu Dhabi a few months ago, and we'll see if he can get back to form, like the form he was in the other year or so when he trounced Diego Sanchez and Kenny Florian, and it'll really be an interesting title scene after that. Did you catch the show, Brooks?
I caught most of it, but not all of it. I did see Tyson Griffin go faceplant into the mat, and I kind of thought that sucked. But I had Gomi winning, so it wasn't a big shock to me.
Well, Tyson was upset, despondent after that knockout, but like Joe Rogan pointed out, he wasn't moving his arms when he was getting punched. His body was moving, but he wasn't defending himself, and it was pretty much a good call. He was definitely out. But moving on in the welterweight division, Jake Ellenberger with a TKO victory after Herb Dean stopped the fight against John Howard when John Howard started looking like E.T., as everyone was saying. He looked like a Rick Baker prosthetic put on his eye to me, possibly a broken orbital bone or something like that. And I was talking to a friend of mine today in the office, and he thought that Jake Ellenberger was pretty unspectacular and pretty boring, I guess, in general, and specifically in this fight last night. And it seemed as if that the San Diego crowd agreed, because there was a lot of boos, and I don't know if it was completely warranted. Yes, he wasn't exactly spectacular in there. He wasn't Takanori Gomi. He didn't particularly follow up in a showy fashion from the fight before. But looking at John Howard, this was a guy who was undefeated in UFC and had a big string of awesome victories, real impressive knockouts, and looked really good. And he pretty much got all of his offense taken out, and I think it was a decently earned victory. What do you think, Rod? Was it a boring fight, or did Ellenberger impress at all?
I don't think it was the most exciting fight. I would have expected more. I mean, Ellenberger, he did use his wrestling, which is good, but I think could have maybe done a little bit more on top, I guess, for the fans. I guess with someone like John Howard, there's not much you could do, but he caught him with a couple of good shots, and you see the results from John Howard's face, and man, it looked like a whole nother head was attached to him.
And that's essentially my point. He derailed the John Howard train that was pretty much full steam ahead so far in the welterweight division in his UFC career. What did you make of it, Jay?
Jake Ellenberger just had a good tactical fight. He fought tough. He didn't really try to pass guard too much. It seemed like he was content with just kind of laying on there and just striking, but it was working. As we've mentioned, his eye was fucked up. I've never seen an eye like that in the UFC. It was brutal. But to John Howard's credit, he really kept fighting. He didn't give up. He would have stayed in there and fought the whole fight. I think it was a good stoppage, and like they maybe alluded to a possible rematch between the two. We'll see what happens there. But Ellenberger, he looked all right. He didn't put on the best show, but he did all right.
Yeah, I'm not saying fight of the night, but like you said, Jay, it took a lot of guts to even come out of the corner from the second round, after the second round from that sort of injury. So credit to him. But moving on to the middleweight division, and a continuing story throughout the night, and that was Japanese fighters doing well for a change in UFC. I've been saying, and I have said on the show in the past, that I wish that some of these Japanese fighters would come over and really blow the audience away, because it seems like they've gotten a victory here and there, some of the few Japanese fighters that have come over for UFC, but no one's ever really put on a dominating performance, like we were talking about Takanori Gomi in the lightweight division in Pride, or even Sakuraba, someone like that. But being on the Pacific Coast, a lot of Japanese fans in attendance in San Diego, and they got to see two Japanese fighters, and we talked about Gomi's impressive KO, and Yushin Okami got a split decision over Mark Munoz. And I think Munoz clearly won the second round, but the other two would definitely go to Okami. What are your thoughts on the fight, Rod?
Well, Okami definitely got the fidget. I mean, I could see the third round how it could be close. I think Cecil Peoples was the one that scored the fight for Mark Munoz, but he really struggled with those takedowns. And for a D1 national champion, I was really surprised how well Yushin Okami was stuffing his takedowns. And I think he just got the better of the stand-up and made Munoz look lost on the feet. And Okami, he did get the W, but after watching that fight, I wouldn't look at Okami like, yeah, that guy is the number one contender. I mean, I would say maybe put him against Victor Belfort, and Belfort's fight back, the winner, Anderson Silva there. But, I mean, right now, I think Okami is maybe at least 2 fights away, 1 or 2 fights away from getting at the middleweight title.
Probably, but I'm just happy that a Japanese fighter won.
I agree with you, Rodney, man. Okami just seemed to wear out Munoz, and as he just kind of laid on him, was hitting those strikes, every time Munoz tried to take him down, each takedown became a little more ineffective. It just wasn't working. It just was not taking its toll on Okami at all. And, yeah, Munoz did seem lost, man. He just wasn't throwing the strikes like he did against Kendall Grove. He just didn't look great. And Okami looked good, man, and we'll see what happens with his future. And, of course, he's won a lot of fights in his UFC career. Does he deserve a title shot yet? I don't know, but I guess we'll have to just wait and see.
Well, speaking of the future, Jay, the one that people have pegged is the future, and I'm one of them, is Johnny Bones Jones. Now, as we teased on our Attitude Era show this week of the MMA Roundtable Open, one person left a comment on YouTube that they were disappointed because they did want to hear our predictions on John Jones and Vladimir Matyushenko. So I gave him my prediction. I said, well, more than likely John Jones is going to win, but it's probably going to be his most difficult victory to date. And boy, was I fucking wrong. And it sucked for me in a way because I wanted to see Vladimir do well, because I've been a fan of the Janitor for a couple years, ever since I saw him defend the IFL light heavyweight title in the Izod Center in New Jersey a few years ago. And of course, he's been in UFC before, headlined against Tito Ortiz, and has a long career with now a 24-5 career record. And unfortunately, since he came back and had his first fight in UFC, I believe in September, it's been a struggle for me to even see his fights, because even though in September that was the first pay-per-view that they were having the prelims on Spike for, he was the one prelim fight that they didn't show. And I was like, fuck. So I had to look it up, and he won that. And it seems like he's won decisions in his past 3 fights or so. But at least he's won, and he's had a decent showing. And, of course, he's got the experience, and I would guess the strength, being that he seems like a bigger light heavyweight than John Jones does. John Jones, of course, the more, I don't want to say lanky, but the smaller frame, like an Anderson Silva sort of frame, as Joe Rogan pointed out. But, man, that crucifix, there was no way to get out of that. And at first, my instinct was, it could have gone a second longer, but even if it did, it would have been the same ending anyway. So, your thoughts on the fight, Rod? John Jones and Matyushenko.
Vladimir was supposed to be the wrestler that was supposed to give John Jones some trouble in that department, but that didn't show at all. Man, when they were staring down, you just saw the height difference. And John Jones had, I think it was like a 10-inch reach advantage, something crazy like that. I mean, this guy is just like phenom, and the kid just turned 23. He just turned 23. He's still the brilliant spot. I mean, and it's going to be 3 more years tops. So this guy's going to just be a heavyweight. I think he's really big, and the fight was almost as I predicted. I thought it's actually going to be a little longer, at least make it to the second round. But I think John Jones proved it wrong, and we're really just waiting to see this young prospect get challenged. And I think we're ready to see him, just like Dana White said, go for one of like the top 8 guys in the stats light heavyweight division.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but back to the fight, Jay. Do you think that they might as well change his name to Hype, since that's the only word they use to describe him anymore? Should he be John Hype Jones, and does he live up to it? I think he certainly does.
I think he does too. He's been living up to it. If he didn't have those illegal elbows on Matt Hamill a few months ago, he would be undefeated right now. Right. But
everyone,
the next fight,
there should be an asterisk next to that one.
Absolutely. The next fight he has to be on pay-per-view, though, in my opinion. They really have to just put him out there in front of the largest audience possible on a big stage against maybe a top 5, top 10 fighter in the light heavyweight division to really see what he's made of, man. Give him a real challenge. Because I'm not saying Brandon Vera and Matt Hamill and Stephan Bonner, guys like that, aren't challenges, but to give him a top contender, that would really be something else, especially since, he's just such a phenomenal specimen. It's just unbelievable how tall and lanky this guy is, and his reach is unbelievable. He kind of reminds you of Anderson Silva a little bit with a different sort of style. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what their next move with him is.
I definitely agree with you, Jay. I think his last 3 fights have been on free TV, and I think his next fight, especially if he fights one of the upper tier guys, I think should be at least an event of a pay-per-view. I mean, people are already begging for this guy to get a title shot. I think it's way too soon for that. I think there's still people ahead of him, but I think it's time that he could test himself up the top guys.
Well, speaking of him fighting on free TV, and of course, unfortunately, the rating went down this time. Not by a huge amount, but by enough. After the show ended, Frank Mir was talking about John Jones, and he said, sort of like what Rodney was implying, that they need to give him time to build him up, because right now he's at a stage where people will be like, well, I don't know if I want to pay because the fight's going to be so short, but if they give him some good opponents, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, I don't know. I think, Rodney, I might actually be one of those people clamoring for him to get a title shot.
If Rashad beat Rampage and this guy beats Vladimir Matyashenko, why would the victory over Matyashenko guarantee a title shot?
I didn't say a title shot right now, but well, maybe I did. What I mean is, if you put him in there with, like for instance, Jackson and Machida's coming up, if you put him in there with any one of those guys, I think he trounces him and goes towards the title.
I don't know if I think him and Machida would be a very interesting fight. I don't know if he'll trounce him like he has done with Vera and Hamill and Matyashenko. I mean, you know, Stephan Bonner took this guy to a decision, and Stephan Bonner wouldn't consider a top 10 guy, but I mean, of course, John Jones has gotten better than that. So I mean, let's give him a test.
Well, let's see what Mr. Brooks thinks. What do you think about the hype around John Jones?
Well, so far I think it's he's lived up to it, but you know, again, like it seems like he reminds me a lot of Brock Lesnar in the sense that he is great as they're doing right now. He's doing great, and so is Brock. We still haven't seen the best of them yet. They still haven't learned everything they need to learn to be successful, yet they're still kicking everyone's ass anyway. So it's a great. That's what makes them so exciting to see. We don't know how great they're going to be the next time out. We think because they always think every time we see them, they get better and better. So there goes. So actually, I think he's probably should get more hype. And he actually might. You see what Brandon Vera a couple years ago said he wanted to be the first guy to be a light heavyweight champion, then go up to heavyweight, win the title, and have both titles at the same time. He actually might be the first guy to actually be successful and actually do it, which I hope he does. That'd be kind of cool to see. One more thing. If you really think he should change his name to Johnny Hype Jones, that sucks, because Bones Jones rhymes, and he broke Brandon Vera's eye socket for crying out. He broke his cheekbone. I mean, for crying out loud, man. You got to keep it bone.
I was being facetious. I didn't literally mean it. Well.
I know.
But I see we've got a lot of you lined up on the phone, and we will get to you in a little bit. But before we move on, coming up this Saturday, we were just talking before we went on the air, Rod, about what a sick fucking schedule UFC has coming up. I can't believe they got such a huge card coming up not even a week later. Big stack card, and it seems like it's USA versus Brazil because every fight is an American against a Brazilian. Just wanted to see some of your thoughts on some of the bigger fights, specifically Roy Nelson and Junior Dos Santos. We know now that the winner of this fight is going to be facing the winner of the upcoming Brock and Velasquez title fight. So I guess this winner between Nelson and Dos Santos gets the first title match of 2011. What do you think's going to happen, Rod?
Fireworks. The straight-up fireworks, Eric. I think this one's definitely a good stand on the feet. Both guys, this is an interesting matchup because they have two heavyweights who are both great on the ground and have great jiu-jitsu. I think Dos Santos might be a little bit faster. I don't think Roy Nelson is going to be able to hold him down. And I'm going for Dos Santos. I'm going Dos Santos with the TKO.
What do you think, Jay?
I'm taking Roy Nelson, man. I think he's gonna be the first guy to really expose Junior Dos Santos' chin and just knock him cold. I really think it's gonna be something like the Ultimate Fighter finale where Roy Nelson just knocked the shit out of Brendan Schaub. I think it's going to be a similar situation. Although I like Junior Dos Santos, don't get me wrong. He's quick. He's an up-and-comer and everything. I just think Roy Nelson's got some momentum, and I have a feeling he's going to win. It's just a hunch. I've
been on the Dos Santos bandwagon for about a year and a half now. I'm not getting off now. Even though I like Roy Nelson, I just think Dos Santos is going to not knock him out, but I think he's going to pound on the ref's going to stop it. But I do like Roy Nelson, but I got to go GDS on this one. JDS.
Well, I like Roy Nelson too, and I'd really like to see him win because I think it would be a great story. But speaking of stories, the story of this show, I mean, there's so many. I mean, we're not even covering so far Matt Hughes, Clay Guida, so many fights. But the main event, of course, is middleweight champion Anderson Silva against Charles Sonnen. I'm still trying to get the name down right. But, of course, the hype for this fight is all Sonnen. He's been talking a lot of trash, like a pro wrestler. The entire hype around this fight has been all sound bites about Sonnen, former NCAA Division I wrestler, and he, I believe in the past, has said that jiu-jitsu is gay. Of course, Anderson Silva has some jiu-jitsu, but more known for his Muay Thai, I would think. Do you think that this is going to end up being the same story, different year, whereas last year, after several fights, like with Leites and so-and-so, that Anderson Silva had an opponent now with Forrest Griffin in the light heavyweight division, where he obviously couldn't mess around? Do you think that this is going to end Silva's dancing and he's going to be, well, of course, Dana White said he has to, but Anderson Silva's really going to take it to him?
It's not going to be the UFC 112 performance, I'll tell you that. Sonnen has done a very good job of getting Anderson Silva at least motivated for this fight. I'm not sure exactly how motivated he was against the Maia fight. I think he was more disappointed that he didn't get to fight Belfort. But, yeah, I think it's similar. I mean, we'll see what Shell has. I mean, he really looks good in his last two fights against two of the top contenders in the middleweight division. So if he could really put Anderson Silva on his back and avoid submissions, we'll see what we could do. I mean, Dan Henderson was the last really good wrestler that Anderson fought, and he's the last person to take a round away from Anderson Silva before he got caught in the second round. Do I see Chael Sonnen going away with the victory? No. I think eventually it's going to stay on the feet, and then once it stays on the feet, then it's lights out for Chael Sonnen.
I think Anderson Silva's going to handle him, honestly. I think that all this trash talking has built the fight up well, but I think it definitely has got Anderson Silva motivated. If it didn't get him motivated, his camp is getting him motivated for this because he really needs to put on some kind of performance. I think this fight's going to be something where a lot of people think Sonnen's got a chance and that he's going to take it to him, and it's going to be a long fight and a good show, but I really think Anderson Silva's going to handle him. I think it's going to be rather quick. So I'm picking Anderson Silva to take it to him pretty quickly and easily.
Well, Silva did say recently, I guess in response to rumors that he might be moving up in not just a weight class, but maybe even up to heavyweight, that he said he'd retire at middleweight. Not that he's going to retire necessarily anytime soon, although that's come up here and there, but just means that he's going to be sticking with middleweight. And it seems like if he does get past Sonnen, there, as we've talked about, seem to be a lot of interesting opponents for him in a division that I guess up until a few months ago everyone thought that he had cleared out, at least pending Belfort's eventual, hopefully, fight that was prevented because of surgery or some sort of surgery. So how do you think this fight's going to go, Will?
Yeah, I'm under the impression that until proven otherwise, Silva's the shit. And until proven otherwise, I don't see a reason why to go against him. But I will say this. Chael has something going for him that no one else has. It's not just his mouth. It's the fact that he's going to be very, very active. He's not going to be the kind of, I love Hendo, and he was a wrestler too, but he was kind of more, he took his time more. I think Chael Sonnen's just going to come right after him and right after him and right after him and not give Silva a chance to breathe and set up, which is what he does better than everyone else in the world. But he even said that, he's still in it in this fight of Silva, and until proven otherwise, he's the shit, and he ain't losing.
Well, I think with all the trash talking that Sonnen's done, he has no choice but to take it to him. And maybe he's just going to walk right into the trap of the spider, which is why he's got that name.
Very, very likely, but we'll have to see, pay to find out, I guess.
Now, let's not forget, though, even though he hasn't lost in years and hasn't lost in UFC, Anderson Silva is not undefeated. He's got a couple losses. And let's also not forget, I heard a ridiculous soundbite by Sonnen. You said, I've never lost a second in any fight I've ever been in. Really? I saw a lot of losses on that record.
He lost to Damian Maia, who got destroyed by Silva.
Yeah. So, anything can happen in mixed martial arts is the lesson. So, moving on to other mixed martial arts, Rodney, you wanted to talk a little bit about the Strikeforce Challengers event that has been going on Showtime recently. Fill us in.
Well, Strikeforce had a Challengers card, which is basically not, I guess, a smaller version of the fight night. There's no really big names on these cards. It shows up-and-comers and maybe some local guys. But the last card they did a few weeks ago was not only a very good card, but it also featured the 135-pound women's champion, Sarah Kaufman, and that made SportsCenter top 10. These cards are very underpromoted, and you can tell by the production that they don't put a lot of effort in, which is stupid because why do you do that with a bunch of fighters who are probably as good as some of the fighters that are on your main cards. But the story with Sarah Kaufman is like, here's an undefeated girl, 135 pounds. I guess you could say she's decently attractive, but this is the Gina Carano that they didn't get to have. I mean, she puts on pretty good fights. She could speak English. She could really captivate a female audience to watch Strikeforce. This is their Gina Carano, and I really don't get why they're not seeing it. And I think this is the women's champion that they should be putting on CBS, that they should be putting on their main show. I mean, hey, people are starting to get on Cyborg, but I think Sarah Kaufman deserves some of the limelight.
Well, that TKO slam was on Roxanne Modafferi, I believe that's how you pronounce the name, and what was funny about the ESPN highlight was the commentator saying, I want to see her fight Cyborg. Unfortunately, it's a different weight class. Because if it was the same weight class, I think they would have made that matchup already. They also just signed Ryan Couture, who's 5-1-1 in his amateur MMA record, who, as you can guess by the last name, audience, is the son of Randy the Natural, and he's going to be fighting on the Challenger show.
They also just signed Paul Daly.
Let's go to calls for a little bit. 210, you're on with Wrestling Roundtable. Name and location, please.
Yes, I'm a model out of San Antonio. Just a quick jump over to wrestling. I attended both Raw shows in San Antonio, the taped one and the actual live one. And I ran into Sign Guy, and I was the actual person who took the video saying he supports Wrestling Roundtable.
Okay, thank you.
MMA-wise, just like Rodney was saying that, about Jones, I saw the fight. It was great. And August looks like an amazing month. But I really hope that Silva just doesn't do the dancing. I hope it's an actual fight. Because Dana White's, after that running around, looked like he was just fed up with him.
He looked so despondent. Like, what do I do with this guy? He might be the first champion that main events a prelim. But let me ask you this. A lot of people were saying at the time, and I wasn't one of them, because as much as I love Anderson Silva, I wasn't defending his behavior. But a lot of people who were saying, it's up to the opponent to knock him out. If he's dancing around, go in. Don't be afraid. Try and finish it. What side of the fence are you on?
I'm feeling you because of the fact that, it looks bad when, you're getting dominated, by just great fighter. And for him to dance around and taunt to make you mad and for everybody to go talk about it, and that's going to be one of those interview questions that you're going to get is, why are you taunting? And he said that he got disrespected by him.
Bullshit.
And yeah, we all know that.
Right.
There's no way, you can do that to Silva and then not get, beat up on for 2-3 rounds.
Well, I mean, my take on it was, it looked like he was playing with his food. If you're really that good, just go in and finish him. End it. Go back to the hotel. Go back to the party. Why go to the fifth round if you can finish it early? But that was just my take on it. So let's go to another call. 406. You're on with Wrestling Roundtable. Name and location. Hello, 406. Hello. All right, enough of that shit. So let's bring on Will Vafides.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have arrived.
Let's talk about some wrestling, and you wanted to bring up Lucha Libre USA, which a lot of people may not know is actually presented by AAA in conjunction with MTV2. AAA, of course, one of the prominent Lucha Libre organizations in Mexico, and people have been saying for years that the Mexican and Latino population and Hispanic audience for wrestling is going to be huge, and that's a market, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if anyone's truly ever gone all the way with that. So maybe there's a Mexican company that's just going to stake out a claim for themselves. Of course, we know they have a video game coming out for all the major consoles soon. So it seems like they're making some strides. They did have a presentation at the E3 a few weeks ago. And a lot of American audiences, and I'll admit I'm guilty of it too, may not be that overly familiar with Lucha Libre or Mexican wrestling. So what do you think of Lucha Libre USA Masked Warriors, Will?
I think it was presented in the best way they can. I mean, of course, they don't have a big budget to work with.
But
they have a decent enough one.
Yeah, they have a decent enough one. It is pretty good. I actually really do enjoy it. It's very fast-paced action. They're trying to introduce the Masked Warriors as characters. They're really trying to give them some characters, which is good. So you can try to separate, because it's very hard to look at all these different guys with masks on. It's very hard to tell the difference sometimes between who's who, especially
between,
the names.
Red and blue, I guess.
Well, no, it's in the names too, because the names aren't exactly easy to remember either.
Sure, right.
So they're doing their best to, make it look good. I mean, they got like one guy basically saying that he's trying to bring American wrestling into it, so they have like characters and they're trying to
Would
build
that be
up
Mark
to a
Jindrak,
world
Marco
title.
Corleone?
Yeah, Marco Corleone, who was Mark Jindrak in WWE,
right.
is their main American guy. He's not the guy he's actually probably the biggest face.
Mm-hmm.
But just recently this week, Amazing Kong came on the show as a surprise. So that was kind of cool to see her, and she looked great. And I heard Carlito's actually going to be on the show too, which is also going to be pretty cool. So they're trying to bring some main stars that we've seen on TV into that promotion since their 90-day contract clause is up. So it's actually pretty good. I would say everyone give it a try. Watch it. It's definitely fun to watch. It's good wrestling. They try to bring some good entertainment into it, too. So I think it's on 11 o'clock, I think, on MTV2. So definitely want to check it out.
Well, I'll admit, I'm guilty as anybody that when it comes to international wrestling, over the years, I've focused primarily on Japanese. Not that I've been completely exclusive for them. I have seen a lot of Mexican wrestling, but I'm not as up on it as I should be. Although when I have looked up a lot of it, like AAA, and a lot of it's on YouTube, you can check it out there, people just like us. Like Mystico I was really impressed with, and when I do check out AAA, as far as production and action, and of course Lucha is very different stylistically in almost every way from American wrestling, I really enjoy what I see, and of course my old buddy Jack Evans is down there too. So, wanted to get your thoughts, Rob, because I think you felt a little different from the preview you saw.
Yeah, I saw their preview show, and I think Martin told me about it, and at first it took me a few minutes to realize that this is actual real promotion and not like a joke, because it was on MTV or MTV2 or whatever, and I don't know, I thought it was some sort of joke thing. Then I saw it was real. I mean, I guess it's something different, and that's what the wrestling needs. Yeah, but I don't know, different in a good way. But it was pretty interesting to say the least.
It definitely brings you back to like the independent kind of style, looking at it. I mean, but they're doing things like they're having women fight the men, and the women are just as good as the men. Mascarita Dorada, he's a midget, the midget guy with the mask. He's wrestling guys of his height, so it's definitely different because you're seeing different aspects of women and midget wrestlers coming together, and they're fighting everybody. So it's a pretty good combination. I think it's going to take some time to get used to, and I think I agree. They might not take it too seriously because I know the announcers are pretty ridiculous. I don't know if Rodney agrees with me.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, the whole thing just came off like really goofy, and it was really hard with all the commentary and everything. It almost looked like they were making fun of wrestling more than trying to promote it.
There are some interesting characters on there, like the Chi-Chi character is pretty funny. I mean, it's funny. It's all like gimmick. But they also have Relic, who was Johnny Stamboli too. He's actually on that show as well. So they have some people you may have seen before, but they definitely got to build this up to. They got to have a main guy, and Marco Corleone has to be the guy to do it because he's the only guy that people pretty much know. No, I'm not saying that. I mean,
I'm joking.
He's the only known guy on the show. So it's hard to say because they have a lot of commercials too, which is a little annoying. They say they're going to have a match, and then they stop it for a second, and then they go to it. It's just like a little weird. It's all about making money.
Well, regardless, I think that Lucha, whenever I check it out, it may be different. It may not be for everybody. I think it's pretty cool, so I would at least say give it a shot, see what you think. But let's go to some other calls. Mel from California, you're on with Wrestling. Not this again.
Fuck you.
All right, enough of that. 512 area code. You're on with Wrestling Roundtable. Name and location,
Hello?
you know the deal.
This is Ben from Austin, Texas.
All right, Ben from Austin, Texas. What's up?
First, I just wanted to say, love the show, love what y'all do with it.
Thank you very much.
Love as much. And for the MMA stuff, too, that's enlightened me. I just want to ask what y'all are thinking of the Miz's, I guess, his current push right now, seeing how he's getting a lot more face time. I'm thinking he's going to be feuding with Randy Orton after SummerSlam.
Well, I know the exact person to throw this to first, and that would be you, Rodney, because I remember years ago you used to love that The Miz was there and being hated.
I did, and The Miz is one of those people that I really don't mind because I guess just seeing him on the real
That's the best phrase you could come up with? Oh, I don't mind him.
I don't. When I heard that he won Money in the Bank, I was like, good for him. They're really going for this guy. And then last night he loses to Orton, so I thought that was really WWE-ish of them to take the guy who's supposed to be the next champion and have them lose clean to someone who would be a good
perennial champion, a billion-time champion by the time we're done.
Yeah, exactly. But it just shows that it's their WWE way of pushing guys, make them lose. So by the time they win, it's not going to matter, and no one cares, and it doesn't mean anything. I mean, hopefully it means something by the time it happens.
Well, hopefully it won't be an echo of last year where he was kind of doing something with Cena, and people were getting kind of excited where, whoa, this might be the program where he breaks through, much like Stone Cold Steve Austin, speaking of Ben from Austin, Texas. When Austin was put with Bret Hart, that was the program that put him over the top and made him into a star, and people were kind of thinking this was going to be the case with Miz and Cena last year, and it didn't quite work out that way. I guess the plug was pulled. Do you think that's going to happen again, Jay, especially in light of all the reports we've been reading about Orton's temper tantrums?
I really don't think so, man. Randy Orton's been having temper tantrums for years on guys for whatever reason, botching spots, not having a good attitude.
Sorry to cut you off, Jay, but just to clarify in case no one has heard, in the taped Raw main event that aired last night, and the recap of which you can read on WrestlingRoundtable.com, by the way, by Bill Treadway, and also Zach Fellas has the SmackDown recap. So check all the latest stuff, including the news update for today on WrestlingRoundtable.com. The main event last night on Raw was Miz and Randy Orton, and the story is that Orton was pissed off that the Miz messed up the timing of the match and was complaining about it backstage. And we all know what happens to people he complains about backstage. They end up in TNA teaming with Jeff Hardy. So do you think that's going to happen again with Miz in the midst of the Money in the Bank briefcase angle, and he's still the U.S. champion, Jay?
I really can't see that happening. I watched the match. I didn't think there was anything wrong with the match. The Miz just seems to be the guy that they're kind of giving the ball to right now, letting him run with it. He seems to be doing a lot of publicity for the company. Reports said that McMahon really loves him right now. It's kind of comparing him to John Cena when he was coming up in 2002, 2003, And the way he's improved is just been phenomenal. He's not regressing like somebody like Kennedy did when he was towards the end of his run, where he just was getting redundant. I feel like the Miz is just getting better every time he goes out there. So I really don't see that happening. I think if anything, this will be a situation where Randy Orton and the Miz can kind of squash it. Maybe they'll talk about it or whatever. But Randy Orton seems to be doing this. He did it to Kofi Kingston. As we all know, he did it to Ken Anderson and everything. So who knows what's going to happen with him. But I really see the Miz sticking with it. And I don't see them making a big deal out of the mistimed match or whatever.
The more I thought about it, Mr. Vafides, when we did the show last, you talked about how great it would be if he lost the Money in the Bank, first person to lose it. And I think not only is that a great idea, they could even drag that out where he's always skittish about using it and then something messes it up at the last moment like has happened the last time. And it could be a great story, especially if he dropped that U.S. title too. But what do you make about this whole Randy Orton situation? And do you think it's going to affect whatever push Miz may have had in store?
No, I mean, it was a good main event match. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I mean, the whole Anderson thing went down with a 5-on-5 tag. It was just not the same scenario. This guy has a lot of credibility in the company now. He's a spokes guy for the company. And even with the John Cena thing, like Stone Cold, remember, he lost, all of his matches against Bret Hart. and then he still became bigger. And I think it's the same thing with The Miz. He kept losing and kept coming out talking trash to John Cena, which I think made him more over than him winning. So I honestly didn't mind him losing. I don't think he jobbed out to it. I think he actually built himself up because he gave himself a main event guy to face, just like Stone Cold did with Bret Hart.
It is important to remember, like you said, that Austin lost all those matches to Bret Hart and still came out the bigger star because of it. However, I think there's a huge difference between going 20 minutes in Madison Square Garden and not tapping out in the I Quit match at WrestleMania and looking macho because of it than losing to Cena in a quick 4-minute squash. But that being said, Will Brooks, your thoughts on The Miz? Do you think he's ever going to make it to the promised land?
You know what? Listening to you guys talk, I just came up with a realization I never thought of before. I think Randy Orton is his next generation's clique. You don't want to work with me, or you don't want to do the spots like I like the spots. Fuck you! I'll get you fired, and they all end up going somewhere else. Not WCW, TNA now. It's kind of weird.
Well, that being said, do you think he's ever going to get over that hump?
Yeah, I think he will. I think Miz is talent. I think he's got a good mic. He can work. I don't see why they can't push him. And I just hope he does. I just hope he doesn't get screwed up like they screw everything else up. All
right. Well, we want to move on to some of the things they got right and some of the things they got wrong, because we did a show on the Attitude Era that is on Go Fight Live, iTunes, and YouTube at the moment. So you can check that out, please. And while you're doing that, sign up for the mailing list. Keep you up to date on Wrestling Roundtable. And you can shop at our Amazon store for anything. Doesn't have to be wrestling or mixed martial arts. Anything you're getting. If you're going to buy it on Amazon, buy it through our Amazon store, please. Now, talking about that Attitude Era show, we're going to be moving on to that after we get to the, as I promised on the last show, Wrestling Roundtable Drinking Game. Yeah! Jingle. Now, of course, you may think it's funny that someone who doesn't drink like me and is obviously not first-hand experienced with alcohol would come up with a drinking game, but I do recognize patterns. Several patterns have cropped up over the course of the past few years, not just on the Wrestling Roundtable, but on the radio show. So, if you're drinking really late, and some drunks may be, but of course we air at different times, and we may be on YouTube. It doesn't have to be necessarily live. If you have a drink in your hand and you're listening to Wrestling Roundtable unwinding, which you should be, here's a little list for you to kick back with. Every time you hear Rodney clear his throat before he talks. Yes, that's one of my favorite things. Here comes the... So, that's one. Another one is every time Chris says, I couldn't pick him out of a lineup of one. One of our favorite lines. And wait a minute. Ronnie. Hello, Ronnie.
What's going on, Mr. Santamaria?
You're actually part of our game. I was going to say every time you hear one of these when Ronnie calls. What is that?
I have no fucking idea.
Every time you call, that's what we hear. It's like you need
that's the motherfucking my smoke detector.
You need to get some new batteries in your smoke detector, man.
Nah, you know what? I changed it yesterday because I had a girl in my room and she didn't give me any because of that damn noise, man. So I finally changed that shit last week. True story, man. True fucking story.
All right. Well, speaking of girls, the next part of our drinking game is every time that Corey gives one of our readers a boner.
Stop it. Stop it.
I guess they're so pent up that, they see a girl. Oh, hot.
Stop it. Stop it.
Not saying that you're not hot, Corey, but just the fact alone that you're a girl, people just seem to go crazy about that. Moving on. Every time I say well, I do happen to say that a lot, Will Vafides, the man who I think is the unofficial spokesman for WWE. Every time, you're a covert. You're a psyop.
Thank you.
Every time Will speaks in one of these cliches, the fact of the matter is, the bottom line is, or you know.
Yeah, basically, the bottom line is...
Truly talking like someone who's grown up in front of a TV watching wrestling. And last but not least, every time Brett, also known as Midge, calls in and insults a listener, and you take two every time the listener deserves it. So that was the first version of the Wrestling Roundtable Drinking Game. Yeah. perhaps more to come. At any rate, back to the wrestling talk. So, some of you, hopefully, many of you, all of you, have watched our show on the Attitude Era. And it's not that I'm disappointed with the show, certainly not, and most of you enjoyed the talk. However, when you're covering such a large span of time, and I know, like 4 years, huge, but being that wrestling's on multiple times a week, every week of the year, there is a lot to cover, and especially all the changes that they went through and we're still living through. So I got a lot of thoughts, and the thing that I didn't want the discussion of the Attitude Era to turn into, and luckily it didn't, was I didn't want it to turn into a Russo bashing show, because I've met Russo, Vince Russo, one of the writers at TNA and former head writer of WWF and WCW. I've met him multiple times, and he's been very nice to me those times that we have met. So I don't really understand the mentality of a lot of course, I've never had to work with him, but people who just wish him death and wish him pain and wish him suffering just because it's fucking wrestling. Now, that's not to say a lot of the shit that he wrote wasn't stupid, because it was. But I wanted to pinpoint an era. Rodney, you and I met years ago talking about wrestling in high school. So this was pretty much the genesis of the Attitude Era. So we had firsthand experience together going through this. And we pretty much have similar opinions on how wrestling has gone. And that's one of the beautiful parts to me about the Wrestling Roundtable, is it's all things to all people. There are some younger fans who haven't been watching that long and want to catch up on their history. There are fans who've been watching longer than we have. And everyone seems to get something out of the show. Wanted to present something that had a lot of different viewpoints. And, of course, there's fans on the show and panelists like Will and Will Brooks and Jay who watch everything and enjoy a lot of it. And you and I, Rodney, aren't exactly fans of the way wrestling in general has gone, not just WWE. As a wrestling fan, you pretty much pick up after about a month the way wrestling works. You can take someone who's a new fan and be like, all right, this is going to happen. What, you've been watching wrestling more than a month? Pretty much people get wrestling. So I tried thinking recently, when did wrestling stop making sense? Because it seems as if nothing really makes fucking sense now. They do things that are obviously meant to undermine certain people and to accomplish a certain reaction, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there may be extenuating circumstances like in the Bryan Danielson situation a few months ago. There was more going on than what meets the eye just on TV. So there may be that factor. But as a general thing, I wanted to say, where was the point that wrestling stopped making sense? Because obviously it had to make sense at some point. There had to be a basis for comparison. And I pretty much pinpointed that it with Vince Russo. Hate to be cliche, because I do like Vince Russo, but even his best stuff. Now, people will generally say that Russo and Ferrara, the team, their three great products were the Austin-McMahon feud, the Kane-Undertaker feud, and DX, and I guess you could throw The Rock in there too, so maybe make it 4. But even in those, there was so much fucking logic gaps and shit. And I know whenever we bring up WWE now, the first thing out of Will Vafidas' mouth is TNA, and I kind of understand it a little more now, because obviously back then it was WCW, and what's the opposite? And it always used to piss me off as a WCW fan that, now granted, WCW was known for doing stupid shit, but WWF would do stupid shit and people would praise it. Like, people would say the NWO, they never had a finish in mind for it. And of course, watching it at the time, I'm sure we all thought it should have ended with Sting and Hogan, but it just kept going on and on because it sold 1 million T-shirts, and then they did Wolfpack and sold 1 million more. But they didn't have a finish in mind for the NWO, and it just kind of faded away. Well, Austin McMahon didn't have a fucking finish either, really, because they did the fully loaded fucking First Blood match with Undertaker long after it should have ended, and then they just retreaded that with Austin helping McMahon, and then Austin had neck surgery, and then by the time he came back, there was more shit with McMahon. It didn't seem like there was any real ending in mind. It just kind of went on and on. But also along those lines, people always used to rip on WCW for the Hummer storyline and how they didn't have a finish for that either. Well, what happened the same fucking year, months later? Austin hit by a mysterious driver at Survivor Series 99. And Mr. Vafides brought that triple threat that never happened up on the show. And, of course, you could tell they didn't have a fucking finish in mind because they ended up going with Rikishi in the most nonsensical fucking heel turn, turning someone that no one wanted to see turn heel, who was in the middle of doing a really hot act with Too Cool that people were into, and he did it for The Rock. Why? Because of Whitey? It didn't even make fucking sense. Rock was the champion numerous times over because of Vince McMahon, no less, in the corporation at first. So it just seemed like whatever WWF did was okay, but WCW was stupid, and it didn't seem fair to me. And there's more to that getting on, but I just wanted to see what you thought of the Attitude Era, Rod. Do you think that's when logic died?
Yeah, that's when I really started questioning where they were going with certain characters. Because the situations that you mentioned, the DX and Austin McMahon and Undertaker, I mean, those are involving veteran wrestlers. I mean, Austin McMahon, those two just had a chemistry that has not been seen in wrestling since. You got McMahon, who really character really into his hands, and Austin. Both these guys have been in the business for years, and they knew what they were doing. Same thing with DX. With DX, let Michaels and Triple H be themselves. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about that DX or the 98 DX. I mean, pretty much you're just letting people go out and be themselves. And also for Undertaker and Kane, I mean, that one. I mean, with Undertaker, I guess you have to really be careful because he, I guess, one of those wrestlers that watches over his character, is really protective of his character. So it's pretty hard to fuck up the Undertaker.
Well, even
but other
then,
than that,
let's say something about Kane Undertaker, okay? As cool as it was, even fucking then, they did, within the first year of Kane being there, like 5 fucking turns. First he debuted, and then you remember a couple months later they did that. And I never understood why, because we all knew it was building towards a WrestleMania 14 one-on-one match. But you remember he saved Undertaker from DX before the Rumble, and they did the pose together, and like, they've reunited all of a sudden for no reason. And then, of course, he turns on him and tries killing him at the Royal Rumble, lighting him on fire in a casket, but they don't do murder.
Right.
And then they teamed up in the summer, and then a couple months later, Undertaker turned heel with Paul Bearer, and this was just the first fucking 12 months.
But it's the build-up. Yeah, it had some kinks on the way, but still, just the build-up between Paul Bearer getting set on fire and Undertaker almost stopping him from telling the secret, and then Undertaker continues his title run, and then months later, you see Kane come in. And then they managed, this would never happen nowadays, but even with all the bullshit, they still managed to keep the match for WrestleMania.
Sure.
And it's still one of the better WrestleMania, one of the better matches that they've had. And even the stuff building up to Highway to Hell I thought was really good, too.
You know what? I'm not going to disagree because I thought it was good. I'm just putting it in perspective. Just the first 12 months after Kane debuted had multiple turns. And that's not to include all the ones that happened in subsequent years and the later feud they had in 2004. And the point being, I'm not looking forward to seeing it again 13 years later.
Besides that, I mean, we mentioned The Rock, but I mean, just like you, Eric, I'm not a Russo hater. Like I've met him to the TNA show they went to and watched shooting interviews with him, and he comes off like a likable guy. You know, he's from the Northeast, just like us.
I like to call him a lovable idiot.
Exactly. But out of all those things that we mentioned, I mean, none of those really pertain to building new stars. I mean, we were supposed to see this new breed of superstar with Edge and Val Venus and D'Lo Brown, and that never really happened. I mean, these storylines that were built around them were all wrestlers that really didn't need these monster pushes. Reinventions, yes, they're good at reinvent. They reinvented Austin. They reinvented McMahon. They, took Undertaker's character to a new level. But as far as taking someone fresh and making them a superstar, it didn't happen with Russo.
Well, it kind of happened with Triple H very forcefully down the line.
It was a reinvention. Triple H was a reinvention.
Mm-hmm. But that may be the case, but one thing that Russo seems to do wherever he is, and whether it's good or bad, the basic point, the fundamental point, is he would always come up with something for everybody to do. Even if it was some stupid comedy shit in the undercard, I guess it's better than not seeing them at all. So at least he came up with something for everybody. Unfortunately, most of it seemed to be ridiculous. But I want to bring Jay Leto into the Attitude Talk because we didn't get to hear your thoughts on camera. So let's hear your thoughts now on the Attitude Era.
Well, Rodney mentioned the Highway to Hell, and that was definitely the most fun wrestling time period of my life. I love the Highway to Hell, and a great moment during that I remember was a time where Austin was locked in the cage with Kane. I believe this was before King of the Ring 1998, in the Hell in a Cell, I should say, I'm sorry. And Undertaker was trying hard to get in because this is where you didn't know if they were in cahoots or not. That was the big storyline leading up to SummerSlam. Mm-hmm. And Austin is beating the shit out of Kane, and Undertaker is on top of the cell trying to break into it, and then the cell starts raising. And they had this wide shot of the entire arena, and the place was going fucking nuts, and I love that. That was a great moment. Another thing you guys didn't mention on the show was the DX impersonations on The Nation, where Triple H made fun of The Rock, and X-Pac was Mark Henry, I believe. And then they also, I think the next year, made fun of the Corporation. They had an awesome impersonation of them. No one remembers that one, though. Yeah, but that was funny, though. That was good. Shawn Michaels dropping the ball and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty funny. Bang 316 when McMahon pissed himself. Austin put the fake gun to his head. I thought that was hilarious. And you got to remember, during this time,
storyline that unfolded over the course of that Raw, so that was at least fun to keep you tuned in and see what would happen next in between matches. Although I did find it weird that Austin called for the audience's approval to shoot McMahon in the head, and they were all cheering.
Oh yeah, it was crazy, but it was absolutely crazy. But it was so funny, man. I'll never forget talking about the next day in school, and it was a great time period. I also recall this one moment where it was the end of a Raw, where The Rock hit Triple H in the back with a chair, and Trish Stratus was laying on the mat, and he fell right into the 69 position with Trish Stratus, and it was fucking hilarious.
It was funny the first time, and the spot's been way overdone since then.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the worst moments, Chyna versus Jeff Jarrett in the Good Housekeeping match, where Chyna...
They didn't know what the fuck to do with Jeff Jarrett, did they?
No, they really didn't, man. Jeff Jarrett... He's a talented wrestler. There's no denying that. He kind of got a little overdone in WCW.
Well, Rodney would deny it. He hates Jeff Jarrett, but I actually always liked Jeff Jarrett, at least on TNA.
He knows what he's doing. He's a talented guy. He's got some good psychology, but Jesus Christ, to put him in there with Chyna and put her over like that was unbelievable. As you guys mentioned before, I did it for the people, I did it for The Rock. Where the fuck were they going with that storyline? Mm-hmm. That really drove me crazy. I didn't enjoy it because they didn't even give Rikishi a chance to be a heel. It just happened where Stone Cold beat the shit out of him in the first match they had. And Linda McMahon in general, especially when she was in that vegetative state, I guess you want to call it, she was in the wheelchair and non-responsive. That whole Linda McMahon saga when she was appearing on TV was horrible, and I couldn't stand that. But when the Attitude Era was going on, I was 12, 13, 14 years old. And like you guys were talking about on the show, it was so great to be watching wrestling at that time where it was stuff that you wouldn't see anywhere else on TV. And being a kid, it was really taboo because my mom just remembered Hulk Hogan and the early 90s and late 80s and letting me watch wrestling back then, but she had no fucking idea what was going on the channel in 1997, 1998. So I really absolutely loved it. It was a great time period. Not my favorite time period, but the most fun time period I've ever had in pro wrestling.
See, that's why I only liked it to a point. I said on the show I liked it for most of '98, and after that it really got out of control to me because I always thought that the fact that, or the idea that you really couldn't feel comfortable watching wrestling with the rest of your family was kind of odd. And you said that we didn't mention a lot of stuff on the show, and that's really because, well, we have time constraints and we can't necessarily cover everything, so that's why we hope a lot of you will fill in the gaps and bring up some of the stuff we missed. And, of course, the other reason behind that is we have talked about a lot of stuff over the course of the show. Of course, when we talk about maybe some of the best matches of the Attitude Era, and we obviously spring to mind with Bret Hart and Austin at WrestleMania 13, or the Calgary Stampede 10-man tag, or some of the other matches like that. Well, we have mentioned those matches in other topics on the show, so it's not like we haven't covered all the ground. Like, I went into more detail about Owen Hart's death last year on the 10th anniversary, but back to my main point was logic going out the window, and what I meant by that is a lot of the traditions and the format or foundation, I guess, of what wrestling was to us, what it was kind of taught to us, meant to be, really went out the window. And that's not to say rules aren't meant to be broken or anything like that, but I just wasn't too much a fan of the emphasis on non-wrestling, like the Super Bowl ad. It was the complete opposite of the Attitude ad that first aired at Survivor Series 97. You may remember those Trax ads in the warehouse. I know what you're thinking. I'm not a real athlete. And then they go through all their injuries and credentials, and that ad really made you proud to be a wrestling fan. It was spine-tingly good. And then you get to the Super Bowl ad, and it's broads fucking on a desk and just ridiculous non-wrestling shit. And that's what the term sports entertainment is really supposed to make you focus on. And we talked about the stupid shit, like with Mark Henry and everything he was doing, with Mae Young and the hand and the tranny, blah, blah, blah. And what I didn't really get at the time was, get it? That even with all this emphasis on talk, 20 minutes of talk to open every Raw, and then every match lasts only a few minutes and blah, blah, blah. Really, at the end of the day, as convoluted and ridiculous as it sounds, everything in wrestling is supposed to make you want to go buy a ticket. So even if it's just very convoluted to think that somehow all these stupid skits with Mark Henry and banging all these broads and his sister and talking to the therapist on the couch and everything, it's really, at its base, supposed to make you want to go, ha-ha, this guy's funny, I want to pay when they come to the arena. So I didn't understand that. I think I understand it a little better now because I realize the McMahons are just self-hating wrestling people, don't even like the term wrestling. But also didn't like the work-shoot shit like Undertaker believes his gimmick and title changes all the time and just traditions going out the window. Like WrestleMania 16 wasn't even WrestleMania 16. It was WrestleMania 2000, which, of course, was the follow-up to WrestleMania 15, the Ragin' Climax. It's just so fucking juvenile, the shit Russo would come up with, and you could see his mentality on a lot of things. He would come up with an anagram where it'd be like PMS and work backwards. Oh, we'll make it Pretty Mean Sisters. Or the short-lived Dustin Rhodes evangelist gimmick, which was representing the evangelists against television and media entertainment. Oh, I mean, eat me. So funny. But I think a milestone also, and we talked about when they hot-shotted the title from Austin to Kane for a day. I think a milestone, and not in a good way, was also when Deborah won the fucking women's title from Sable. It's bad enough that Sable, who wasn't exactly Bull Nakano, in terms of wrestling skill at least, was the women's champion, and then she lost to Deborah, who wasn't even a wrestler, which of course set the precedent for other non-wrestlers winning the titles, like every McMahon but Linda. That wasn't a good precedent, and the non-stop puppies and suck it, and I'm so glad we're past all that and hearing that every week. And the only people who keep that up are the idiot wrestlers who used to watch that shit back then. Let's go to some calls. You've been on the line, and I want to bring you up real quick. So, Corey, hello.
Hello, Eric. Do I really cause that kind of reaction with people? I was listening, you know.
You should see the comments. But at any rate, let's hear your thoughts on the Attitude Era.
One storyline that sticks out in my mind for some reason was the Owen Hart swerve where he joined the Nation of Domination. Mm-hmm. When it happened, I remember liking that because outside of that, that was probably my least favorite thing about the Attitude Era, save for Mae Young giving birth to the Hand. But I wanted to know what you thought of when Owen joined the Nation of Domination.
Well, see, he joined because he was the Black Heart. Get it? Black. But at that point, the Nation was starting to change from the original versions, which was, of course, the black supremacist group. Russo was trying to change it over where everyone's going to have their individual personalities, which sounds nice on paper, but kind of does take away the idea of a faction in a way. I just liked it a little more uniform when everyone had a common purpose and a common goal and a common look and things like that. Let's not forget that this was after the aborted singles push after Montreal when he didn't even get a one-on-one pay-per-view title match with Shawn Michaels. You may remember at the end of the DX in Your House, he attacked Shawn Michaels, and it was awesome. People were really into Owen on the next Raw because he was the lone heart left, which, of course, sprung up the Nugget nickname, and as opposed to getting a match with Shawn Michaels, he got the job to his buddy Triple H. And it didn't seem like they really were ever going to do anything with Owen, and even after he joined the Nation, he segued into a feud with Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn, and that's another group of guys who are really interesting in the Attitude Era because it's interesting to see how MMA and wrestling ebb and flow together around that time frame because a lot of those guys, like Tank Abbott went into WCW and Severn into WWF and Shamrock was already there, was because UFC wasn't doing very well and they needed some money, so they either got into wrestling or fought over in Japan and did essentially non-UFC stuff. And Ken Shamrock is the one who introduced the tap out to wrestling, and that's a staple of wrestling now. You may remember, Rodney, when we were growing up before tap outs, JEU as well, that there was no visual cue for a submission. You had to wait for the referee to ring the bell and you weren't totally certain. And that split second sooner now where you see the tap out, it's much more visual, and wrestlers are always caught up on being visual and letting people see stuff. So that's a staple of wrestling now. So in a way, he was kind of ahead of his time. And I also thought it funny because you may remember, Rodney, some of the early UFCs or even some of the later ones later on when he would fight with Tito Ortiz, let's say. Wasn't the thing that people always said about Ken Shamrock and Severn that they were so fucking uncharismatic and boring in WWF? Didn't you find that the complete opposite in UFC? These guys could actually talk?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it didn't translate well when you make them read off, cue cards or whatever it is, or have them memorize lines. But if you just let them, be themselves, I think you have there's a reason why they are brought into WWF because they saw a character in them, and when you try to change that character around, it starts to, I guess, mess with the intended character, the original charisma that these guys have. They weren't allowed, not so much allowed, but they weren't given the right opportunities that they should have.
Let's go to another call. 416, you're on the air.
Hey, Eric, how's it going? It's Graham calling from Toronto. I'd like to give a bit of a different take on when Logic died.
Sure.
Because I think it was Logic dying that allowed the Attitude Era to start up. For me, Logic started dying when you got fake Hogan and fake Macho Man and fake Ted Turner. Mm-hmm. It was when Vince McMahon started letting his pettiness and his view that no one's doing things for their own reasons, they're all doing it to attack him, actually start affecting the programming. And then as the years go on, who are the people that become the top guys? Vince Russo, who feeds into that. Shawn Michaels, who had that whole clique. And they start letting their own pettiness get in it there, and he finds these kindred spirits. And then they let all of the stuff in the back affect the actual quality of the programming in a way that either didn't happen before then, or if it did, it was so subtle, or we just didn't know about the back, that it didn't affect us the same way. Like, that's what the Attitude Era brought to wrestling, and that's what has really killed a lot of mainstream wrestling since then, and is the worst in TNA, is because everyone lets whatever their own issues are, their own personal issues that shouldn't have anything to do with the programming, affect the programming. And fewer people give a shit because it's not about putting on a good show, it's about pissing off someone who pissed you off 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you brought up that Billionaire Ted skit, because what the hilarious part about that is, of course, Russo is also featured in that, but they looked towards Nash and Hall and Ahmed Johnson at the time, but they ripped on WCW in these in January, I believe, 96, and then by the midway point, the very people they were promoting as the new generation went over to the other side and were leading their destruction. And you talked about people letting petty jealousy and ego get in the way, and I noticed a lot of people were bringing up Raven and the fact they really didn't do anything with him when he came over from ECW in the middle of the Attitude Era. And if we want to talk about ECW people coming in, I want to look more towards Taz. Because as great as a debut he had and all the hype and build, pretty much from there on, it was a fucking wash. A pay-per-view later, he was getting beat up by both Bossman and Buchanan at the same time. Are you shitting me? And we went into the Hardcore Battle Royal and all the other stuff that happened with Taz, just a ridiculous amount of shit. But I also wanted to point out the Radicals coming over. I am firmly of the belief that once Russo left, they pretty much stuck with him and his and Ferrara's format for as long as they could. And the motivating factor, I think, that somewhat changed that, and of course we did point out that all the best matches, it seems, of the Attitude Era involved some sort of weapon, whether it was a table or a chair or much more elaborate like a cage, to some extent. It seemed like there was a hardcore factor in every match, and we didn't even talk about the Triple H Cactus matches in detail, like the MSG match and the Hell in a Cell eventually and the Great Street Fight. And it's not to say these fights aren't good, these matches aren't good, but it just seems like a real indicator when it seems that all these great matches all involve weapons from this era. But anyway, back to the wrestlers. I'm firmly of the belief that when the Radicals and Taz and Angle all came in within a month or so of each other, that a lot of these guys, and Austin was not there at the time, but a lot of these guys like Rock and Triple H and Undertaker and the guys who were in the main event scene at the time, I think there was some sort of collective thing going on where they all felt like, well, geez, these guys are really good, and if we're not going to get outshined, we got to step up our game. And it led to a lot of good matches in 2000, and I still, Rod, after all these years, haven't seen that Iron Man match with Rock and Triple H that everyone praises. That being said, a lot of these WCW guys, because that's essentially what most of them are, that came over, I think there was some sort of mentality where we have to do something with a lot of these guys. Now, of course, they didn't do much with Saturn and Malenko and whatnot, but I think when they got guys like Benoit and Jericho, they had it in their mind, we have to make these guys big stars or champions, or at least the illusion that they're big stars at some point, just to show up WCW that we're the place that makes young guys. Because let's face it, like I said on the show, when Jericho came in, the first half year was pretty fucking lame. Because he had that segment with The Rock that, like I said, he undermined him with. 2 segments later, he was doing shit with Road Dogg in SummerSlam. And by the time he started wrestling, he got rid of Ken Shamrock with Mr. Hughes. And then they dropped Mr. Hughes, and they went with the fake Ralphus, Howard Finkel. And he's feuding with Chyna and losing at first. I thought this was pretty fucking pathetic for a guy who was really making his name in WCW. Until he left, of course. It seemed real forced to me. And, of course, they squashed the Radicals when they came in at first. They lose all their matches. They lose their first TV matches. They lose their first pay-per-view matches. They lose their first WrestleMania. Blah, 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 blah. Although it did, to Eddie's credit, lead to that good pairing with Chyna. But what do you think about WWF's take on these WCW guys, Rod? Because you said when Austin beat Big Show on the Raw before WrestleMania, this was an indicator to you that they would never push the WCW guys.
Yeah, the Radical situation is one thing that I didn't get to mention on the show, how in one single night, Triple H and friends could just destroy these new, young, I guess, prospects, all 4 of these, great talents coming over from WCW. I mean, granted, at this point, the Monday Night Wars are pretty much in WWF's favor, but still, you have these very, very talented guys, and in one night, boom, gone. And continued all the way till 2003. But the story with Paul White, as they called him then, here was, one of the first big jumps from WCW to WWF in that era. And the first thing you want to see is, I guess, him and Austin. Oh man, maybe they'll have a big pay-per-view match. And as soon as he lost clean to Austin on Raw, I knew that was it. That they'll never do anything positive, or at least give the fans what they want with the WCW guy. Because I thought that was the worst marketing, the worst way to promote this new talent from WCW. They could have used them, they could have reinvented them in their own way, but instead he lost Austin clean, which made the whole thing completely worthless. And you, Eric, I'll never, ever, ever forget coming into school and less than a month of the big show, I guess, coming in, or maybe like less than 2 months, I'll say, just to be safe, you sing a song about the big waist. How much of a waste it was for him coming over to WWF. And it's always stuck in my mind. And same thing with Jericho. He's a guy who's hyped up to come in all summer, and it just didn't work well. I mean, the Rock pretty much buried him in the segment, and then from there on, nothing came about with him. And they were pretty much lost with this another great young talent from WCW.
Well, the way they undermined those guys like Jericho and Benoit while putting the belts on them, too, is a topic for another day. But one last thing I wanted to point out about that, I thought it was hilarious that at Fully Loaded 2000, they had 3 matches where they pitted one of the newer guys against an established guy. It was Undertaker and Angle, Triple H and Jericho in the Last Man Standing match, and Rock and Benoit, and clean fucking sweep, all the young guys lost. And somehow WCW was worse than WWF in doing this. That's going to wrap it up real quick for the Attitude Era. And like I said, real quick, Jay, TNA HardCORE Justice is this Sunday. What are your thoughts on how this pay-per-view is going to turn out?
It's just going to be another rehash of this old ECW one-night stand storyline. I hope it's entertaining. I hope they pull out some surprises and
you think
give
Jerry
these
Lynn
guys.
and Van Dam can pull it off in 2010?
It's not going to be near as good, but I think I'll have a solid match. I mean, Jerry Lynn can still go, and Rob Van Dam obviously hasn't really lost too much of a step, so it's not going to be as good of a match. There's no chance of that happening, but I think it's going to be pretty good if they give it enough time. Yeah, I hope it works out for them. I really hope so. But
I
do I
prefer
like
to see
the idea?
Dreamer, Raven, and Foley on The Biggest Loser.
That would be hilarious.
There's
man.
multiple
I think
meanings
that
in
would
that
draw.
for all 3.
Yeah, I think that would draw money, actually. Put them on ABC or whatever, NBC.
So what about SummerSlam 2010 coming up? We have the Sheamus, Randy Orton title fight, and then, of course, the big 7-on-7 where everyone's expecting some sort of turn, because that's what happens. It's another fucking relic of the Attitude Era. I'm sick of factions and heel owners and all this sort of shit. All this shit needs to go away. Enough of it. No more authority figures. No more stupid factions and turns. We got along fine for decades in wrestling without it.
Oh, yeah, there's going to be a big swerve in that match. There's no question about it, especially with Jericho and Edge bowing out on Raw. But I kind of like Sheamus, Randy Orton. I think they're going to pull off a decent match. I'm not sure what's going to happen. It's really hard to tell who's going to win. But I like the Nexus SummerSlam build-up. I really do. It's not that bad. You know what I would love to see? Bret Hart turn heel. I would love to see that happen again.
Well, it's possible it could happen, and if it does, we will be talking about it next time we're on Blog Talk Radio for Wrestling Roundtable Radio. And before we go, I want to send best wishes to Bobby the Brain Heenan, who, of course, suffered some injuries in the past few weeks. It's really sad to hear about the shape that Bobby Heenan is in, one of our favorites from our childhood, and wish him the best and a decent enough recovery. And I also wanted to send out a hello to Joe in New Jersey, who I met in Philadelphia a few weeks ago. He works for quadnews.net, and he's a big fan of the show, and real nice to talk to him. You can join us August 22nd at the Burlington National Guard Armory in Burlington, New Jersey for Pro Wrestling Respect. And along those lines, I wanted to mention Steve Oftelli, a fan of ours out in California. He bought tickets to Pro Wrestling Respect. This is a guy who buys DVDs, T-shirts, really supports the show. And I almost wrote him and said, are you going to be able to make it to New Jersey? Are you going to be in the area or something? And then I saw in the special instructions that he bought the tickets knowing that he isn't going to be in New Jersey. He's on the other side of the continent, but he wanted to support the show. That was beautiful. Thank you, Steve. And I wanted to mention also a fan of ours, Brad, who asked me to autograph some of the Pro Wrestling Respect DVDs that he's bought. So thanks very much. I'm very flattered, and I wish there was about 100,000 more of you guys. And also, Molly Holly got engaged. I just found out after we got off the air a couple weeks ago. So maybe I can start getting up some donations so I can make the flight over to Minnesota and pull a graduate on her and try and stop that wedding before it happens. I missed Alicia Keys. I don't want to miss Molly Holly. So hopefully you don't miss the Wrestling Roundtable. Join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com. You can get the links to our MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, Go Fight Live, and iTunes. Join us in a couple more weeks right after NXT at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on blogtalkradio.com/Wrestling Roundtable. So for the panel of Will Brooks, Will Vafides, Jason Aledo, and Rodney LeConte, I'm the host, Eric Santamaria. Join us in a couple weeks.